Hey, what's up guys? My name's Ben. I'm an instructor and a contract technician here at OpenWorks. What we're going to be going over today is the CNC router, which you see right here. Here at OpenWorks, we have 3 different CNCs. Specifically today, we're going to be going over the 2 Shopbots. The Shopbot is typically used to cut through sheet goods, anything that's thicker or just around a ½ inch, and it can also fit sheets that are 4 feet by 8 feet. Those sheet goods typically include plywood, hardwoods, or various plastics. You can get through acrylic, polycarbonate. Some plastics that you wouldn't be able to cut through on the lasers, you can also drop here on this machine, and then you can cut through those without releasing any toxic fumes or gases. So what the goal of this video is for today is to get you guys a quick refresher on how to run the machines from start, basically when the machine is off, all the way to running your files itself. What we're generally going to go over is how to get to the machine, what you do before you start, what you do to get started, how to turn on the machine, etc., how to run your file, and general tips and tricks and general troubleshooting. These are going to be things that a lot of members typically have trouble with or things that they might run into. We're going to try to get you through all of that, and hopefully by the end of this, you guys will be comfortable enough to run the machines and to get your work done in a quick, safe, and efficient way. So let's get started. All right, so when you get to a machine and you see that it's off like this, the first thing you want to do is turn it on. To turn on a Shopbot, there are 3 things you want to do first. You want to locate the 3 red buttons. It's going to be 2 emergency stops. One is located on here, the gantry. One is located here to the side of the laptop. And the third is going to be a flip switch that actually turns the machine on. First, you can flip the switch. These 2 emergency stops are used in a twist pop orientation. So you twist this, pop that out. Same thing over here. Twist this, pop it out. The next step is to reset the machine itself with this blue reset button. Once you click that, you'll hear an audible click, and then that is when you know that the machine itself is on, and you can move forward to turn on the actual software. The software is going to be on the screen right here. If you go down to the bottom, it is going to be the icon that looks just like the machine, called Shopbot 3. Once you open it up, you'll see that these 2 screens will come up. The first thing you want to do is warm up the spindle. The spindle warm-up routine is more important when it is colder in the shop itself. It lubricates the spindle itself and also ever so slightly expands the gears within that machine, just so nothing catastrophic happens. It also slightly increases the amount of accuracy that the spindle can achieve. It's just a general common practice that is beneficial for the machine itself. To get there, what you want to do, you can either go up to cuts at the top bar. Once you click on cuts, it's going to be right down here called Spindle Warm-Up Routine. You can click that, and then this screen is going to come up. An alternate is you can type in C5 and enter. It will bring up the same exact screen. This screen that you see on the computer right now is a very, very important pop-up. This will come up throughout the entirety of using this machine, and also throughout all of your cuts. What this does is this is actually going to be turning on the spindle itself to actually cause the spindle to spin. Whenever you see this caution symbol in the upper left-hand corner, you want to do 3 steps in this order. The first step is going to be to go over here and make sure that this spindle key is in and engaged. It is attached to the collet wrench that is always going to live right there. What you want to do is put the key in and engage it. You'll hear a little chunk. The next step is going to be to go over here, back to the controller, where there's a green button that says Start. You want to click the green Start button before you click OK on the screen itself. You want to hear the spindle spin, just like that. Once you click on this, then you can click OK. Again, those 3 steps are key, in and engaged. Second step is the green Start button. Once you click that, this should start to spin. Final step is to click OK on the screen. And then what you should see is a list of times. It will go through a series of a couple speeds at 180 seconds per speed. This will take generally 9 minutes. And then once this is done, you'll be able to get back to using the machine itself. This time is typically good to be used for going over to the computers and setting up your files. So this has been warming up, it's finished now, but one thing you want to make sure of before you start to do anything else with the computer is to go to the computers over there and make sure your files are set up for your cuts. Typically what you want to do is set up your files for the material you will be cutting for that day. What's going to be happening is you want to come to the computers and then open up VCarve, pull up your file, and just make sure everything is set up the way you want it to. Right now, my file is open. This should look familiar to some of you that have taken my classes in the past. This is the example file. The biggest thing you want to make sure of is that all of your tools are set up in the right way. They're the right feeds and speeds. You have swapped it out to the correct bits. Typically, if they are going to be changing between a down cut and an up cut, that is going to be something you want to make sure of here, just so you can gauge which bits you will be using throughout the course of the day. You also want to set up your file to represent the material you will be cutting. Today, I have a longer strip of plywood, so I have made my material on my screen represent that, and these are just the general checks. The last thing you want to check, this is very important, is you want to go up into the corner right here and just make sure that you take note of where your Z0 is. Right now, my Z0 is at the top of my material. So eventually, once I take my material and put it on the bed, it will be at the Z0, which will be the top of the material that I'm going to be touching off on. What I'm going to do now is just save this toolpath with the floppy disk button. Save toolpath to a USB drive. Mine's already plugged in. So save it, make sure you name it something that you know. It will be saved out as a Shopbot TC inch or a .sbp. That's going to be what you want to be using for the two Shopbots we have here. Just make sure you're setting the right post and you'll be set from there. So I'm just going to call it today's date, which is 7/20. Example, save, and once this is done, we're set. We're going to go back over to the machine and run it from there. So first thing you want to do is with your flash drive, you typically want to take that toolpath that you just exported and pull it out onto the desktop. What happens, especially with laptops like these, is if you accidentally run into your USB drive or your flash drive and jog it out of the computer itself, sometimes it will stop the actual cut just because it loses the data that it needs. What you're going to be doing is just plugging it into a free USB slot, which I'm doing right now, and drag off your file. I called it 7/20 example. Click and drag off to the desktop, and you're going to be set from there. I'm going to eject my flash drive first. I have just pulled the new toolpath off onto the desktop, and this is where we're going to start setting up the machine to cut, put our material on the bed, and then run the file on the machine itself. I have set aside my material over here. This is going to be the same size as you saw on the screen before. This is a 14x5x96 piece of plywood. I'm going to drop this on the bed first. Make sure the orientation is the same as what you had before. I had it long lengthways along the x-axis. In this room, the x-axis is always going to be towards the doors where you enter. The y-axis is always going to be towards the windows. So right now, I'm just going to line my material on the CNC bed just to make sure it's even. And then next would be to nail this down with some plastic nails. The plastic nail gun lives in this cabinet right here off to the side. Nail gun lives down here. All of your tools are going to be in here. Generally at this stage, you want to gather the tools you're going to be using. For me, it's going to be one downcut bit and one upcut bit. The collets you need in addition to the nail gun. So in this drawer, you can see that everything is organized by which machine you're using and by collet types and sizes. In here, it's also labeled by upcuts and downcuts. So I'm going to grab a downcut, grab an upcut, grab a collet nut, as well as the corresponding collet. I need a 1/4 inch collet, which is going to be this one. A good tip is if you don't know, or if these bits are not labeled, which one's an upcut or a downcut, is to take the bit itself. All the spindles are going to spin clockwise. If you take this, drag it on your shirt, any tool that pulls up on your shirt without any resistance, this is going to be an upcut. The down cuts are just gonna start to glide on the top when you spin it. So you can see this isn't pulling up on any material. That's gonna be my down cut. This up cut is gonna instantly start pulling on that cloth. So this is gonna be my up cut, this is a down cut. Again, you really only need to do that if these are not labeled, which they are currently. So gonna pull these, bring them over in addition to the nail gun. And go back over here and start setting up. Once the bore is nailed down, first thing you want to do is grab your collet and collet nut. The way these two go together is if you imagine this as a little lip, the lip goes down into the nut itself. You want to press it down until you hear a little click. That click means this is now one unit and you're ready to put in your first bit. Out of your two bits, you want to look for the one that you proceeded with first in your tool path. For me, it's going to be the down cut bit. Pull that out. And then this is when you want to install the bit and then touch off the top for the Z zeros and then touch off this corner for your X and Y zeros. The easiest way that I found to put the bits into the collet is to take this as one unit and then kind of take this and put it in. When you put a bit into the collet, you always want to go from bottom up and not top down. When you put it in from top down, these cutting flutes on the bit itself is going to cut up the collet and lessen its ability to actually grab onto it. So it's always going to be bottom up. A good rule of thumb is always going to be an 1/8 inch from the top of the fluting to the bottom of the collet, or an 1/8 inch from the top of the collet to the top of the bit, whichever one comes first. The bits come in different lengths, so one will typically happen before the other. For this one, it's going to be about 1/8 of an inch from the bottom of the collet. Easiest way to hold it is to take the collet nut, put it in between your thumb and middle finger, take a ring finger and push up against the side of the bit. You can now hold this whole thing as a unit and the bit won't fall out on you. These bits are carbide, so when they do fall on the concrete ground, it will chip. So just be aware of that. Make sure you don't drop it. And this is how you're going to install the bit. When you take this whole thing over to this, what you can imagine this is going to be your bottle cap. This is going to be your bottle. Whenever you're opening up a bottle of water or when you're closing a bottle of water, it's going to be the same direction that you're going to be spinning. So if I hold this as my bottle stationary and make this act as a bottle cap, to tighten, I'm going to spin this way in a clockwise direction, and it's going to start to ride up the threads. You want to tighten it until it's pretty much hand tight and that the bit does not fall out the bottom. Once it's hand tight, you can take the wrenches and then tighten it up, and that's what we're going to do next. These wrenches are always going to live right here by the CNC. There's going to be one which has the teeth, one that's going to be a typical wrench. The way to tighten is going to be these teeth match up with the openings on the collet itself. Pull that up. The wrench goes over here. And again, you want to make sure you're going in the correct directions. I'm trying to tighten, so it's as though I'm closing the bottle cap. So my top wrench, which is on the cap, is going to go in a clockwise direction. About 1/8 of a turn to 1/4 of a turn is going to be enough to make it tight. You want to make sure you don't over tighten it or you're going to have a hard time getting it off on the opposite end once you're done. And then that's ready to now touch off. So at this point, the bit is inside the collet, inside the spindle. What you want to do is make sure nothing else is on the bed of the CNC aside from the material you're going to cut. And then this is when you're going to touch off in the corners for the X and Y zeros, and also touch off the top of my material because that's how I set it up in my file. And then we're going to set that as the Z zero. The way to do that is on your screen, on this red box off to the right, what you're going to see is a couple icons. This button with the XY with the arrows, that's going to set your XY zero. The arrows with the Z, that's going to set your Z zero. Typically, for me, I prefer to set the XY first, so I'm going to click that. This machine is going to start to move. What you're going to see is it's going to go up to the extent of the bed. Right now, it's going up to the end of the X-axis. It's going to touch off a couple times. That is now set at the 0. it is now moving in the Y direction. It's again going to hit the end stop. Once it touches the sensor, it will also stop and set that up to 0. And this is typically going to be where most people will set their zeros, is going to be in the bottom left-hand corner. If you have a custom 0, what you can do is move to that position with the computer itself and set the 0. And to do that, what you want to do is go to the yellow keypad off to the right. Once you open this up, you can move this either by typing in a number or by moving it with the arrow keys. Once you're set with where your 0 is, you can click on 0 axes and then set the X and the Y to that position and click on 0, and that will set your X and Y axes to the 0 at that point. So next, what we're going to do is open up the keypad again and shift the spindle itself to live above the actual material. This is what we're going to do in order to touch off the Z axis. You can see that I'm sort of clicking and holding the arrow keys to move it in the left and the right, or the X and the Y axis. On this icon, the short dimension, so these two arrows will be moving in the short direction on the machine, which in this case corresponds with the Y. The longer arrows, these two are going to correspond with the X. This is how you move it to the left and the right, depending on how you're standing. So right now the bit is above my material, and this is where I'm going to start to set up the Z. Close out of the keypad, and then what you want to do is click on the Z button with the two arrows, and then set up the plates to be able to touch off. The pop-up on the screen is going to say, make sure you're above the plate and ready to 0, and that is when you hit enter. So this is the plate. This is going to be under the bit itself. Make sure this is flat. This alligator clip is going to live right here. So it's on this metal part. What this is doing is it's completing a circuit. Once this bit touches this plate, it will complete the circuit itself, and it'll tell the machine that this is where its 0 should be. So I am now above the plate, the alligator clip is on. I can go back over here and hit enter. And I prefer to hold the plate down. This isn't particularly necessary, but what this does is it makes sure that the plate doesn't shift and it doesn't move. The bit's gonna come down twice. After it comes down twice, this is now set. If you take a look at the screen, what it says is make sure you remove the alligator clip. Just make sure you remove this. This is more of a safety issue. Put the plate back as well. So this alligator clip lives on this little plastic block. This plate is slid back down right there, and now you're set to move to the next step. Next step is going to be to set up the dust shroud. This just aids the vacuum, the dust collection, and collecting any chips that might come off of your cut, and prevents all of that from getting spewed out onto the ground or onto you or onto your cut itself. The way to do that is you want to move this up a little bit just so you can shift this underneath the bit itself. Again, whenever you want to move the machine, you want to use the yellow keypad icon, which again is right here. So once you click on that yellow keypad, these two arrows right here in the up and down direction, that's going to move up in the Z. So click and hold, it's going to shift the spindle up in the Z direction. Just move it up enough that you can fit the shroud underneath it. The prongs go into the sides, and then what you can do is shift this back up, and then you can tighten up here with this black knob. Once this is tight, you're essentially set to now run the file itself. Just make sure the tube is on, and you can start setting everything up to actually run your file. There we go. Once that is all set, again, prior to this, we have already placed our file onto the desktop. We are calling it 720 example. The next step is going to be to actually start the machine itself. When you start to run any file, you want to go up to File in the corner. Once you click on that, the first option is going to be Part File Load. That is when you want to click. Part File Load is going to pull up basically this browser screen. You want to find the file that you're trying to cut. We are on the desktop and it is 720 example. Click on that, hit open, and it will pull up this yellow notepad. You should typically not be changing anything on here. If you do end up changing anything, make sure you let a technician know. They'll be able to change it back. But this is going to be a screen you want to ignore, and then just hit start. Hitting the start button at this point when the yellow notepad is up will not start the spindle or start the file. This is pretty much equivalent to a next button. And what will sometimes happen is it will pull up this screen. This we mentioned before during the warm-up. This is a very important screen. Anytime you see this yellow caution symbol in the corner, you want to do those 3 steps, which is key in and on, hit the green button, listen for the spindle to spin, and then hit OK. Sometimes what will happen is it will bring you through some prompts asking if the bit is in the spindle or if you've touched off. Just run through those prompts, answer the best you can. Typically it's going to be a yes or no question. But at this point, I am now ready to start the machine. What you want to do is typically, if you have hearing protection, put that on now. If the dust collection is not on, turn that on now. I can show you where that is. It's in the corner. Basically, essentially, green button is turning that on. After that, once dust collection is on, once you have the correct protective equipment, then you can go through those 3 steps, which again are taking the key on the wrench, putting it in, engaging it, hitting the green button, and then clicking OK. Great. So this back room, this is where the dust collection lives. Sometimes this will be pretty much full, but at this point it is pretty much empty. Again, this is the green button. Make sure this is on. Panel. This is now on. Now the 3 steps again. Key is now engaged. I'm going to now hit the green button. Spindle's now spinning. The bit is in there. Everything is tight. We're ready to run. I can now hit OK. Typically at this point, it's a good safety practice to stand generally around the area of the computers. If anything starts to go wrong, you have access to this red emergency stop. You can hit that. It's going to cut the power to the machine. That's a safety. The other is you can also hit the space bar. The space bar pauses the machine. It's going to take a little bit longer, but it will still stop the machine. So if it's not something that's going catastrophically wrong, I would recommend hitting the space bar. If something looks dangerous and you want to stop the power right away, hit this red button. So I'm going to hit OK. And this should now start to move to where So I don't know if you remember Harrison.
Yeah.
So he was the one that designed those.
He designed it?
He designed that file that we're making right now.
Oh, okay.
So I think he was just fooling around.
Okay.
But
yeah, what is he doing now? I thought he was...
he's still at Cooper Union.
Okay.
So he's their shop manager up there. All right, so now you can see that it's paused, but the file hasn't completed yet. When it's not completed, what I have done in my file in particular is I'm swapping between a downcut bit and an upcut bit. The benefit of using the Shopbots is they can stop the machine when it's at a new bit. So it now knows that I should be switching to what this sees as tool number 2. Tool number 2 in my file is corresponding with the upcut bit. This has now stopped the machine itself, and it is now asking me, is tool number 2 in the spindle? I'm going to answer that prompt with the correct answer, which is no. At this point, this is when you're going to be going through and changing the bit out. So this next prompt asks if you want to use the keypad to move to a height. Typically, at this point, you want to say yes. It's going to bring up the yellow keypad for you. You can now use this to shift the machine to a good spot where you can access the bit. With the yellow keypad up, what I'm going to do is remove the hose, stick it right there so it's out of the way, Actually not right there because it's loud. You want to loosen up the black knob up here so this falls down. And at this point, what you want to do is lift up this in the Z axis, again on the yellow keypad, just enough that you can access the bit. You want to watch out that you don't move this up too high because you might end up crashing into the end stop. There really isn't a way to tell when you're close, so the easiest, safest thing to do is just to move it up until you can see the bit above this blue collar right here. So again, right here, this is where you move up and down on the Z axis. Click and hold, just tap a couple times. That is a good height right there. You can see that I can get this dust shroud out, no problem. I'm not hitting the bit, but it's also not way too high, and I also haven't hit the end stop. Set this off to the side first. You want to take your 2 wrenches. This is now going to be in the opposite direction. I am now going to try to remove this. So if you go back to the bottle analogy, this bottom piece is your bottle, this is your bottle cap. What you're trying to do now is open up the bottle. This is where my bottle cap is. So I'm gonna insert my wrenches like that. I now want to spin my top wrench in the counterclockwise direction, which is gonna be this way. Easiest way to do it is if you have your 2 wrenches close by, use your arm and hands as leverage and start to push. It should give pretty easily. You just want to use your hand to loosen it a little bit. You should catch after a couple spins. Use your wrenches again when it catches. The bit should come right out. Set that aside. Get the collet off. You can see these 2 are together. Sometimes there will be some dust caught up inside the collet, especially for longer periods of time when you're cutting larger sheets or when you're cutting material like MDF. Sometimes when there's too much dust in there, it prevents the bit from actually tightening properly. So what you want to do at this point is to break the collet and the collet nut apart. Kind of like you're splitting an apple. Take one hand, cover the nut, take the other hand with your thumb, hit the collet, break it apart like that. Tap it out a couple times. There shouldn't be any dust in there. You can now assemble this back and swap out to your next bit. My next bit is going to be the upcut. This is going to be the finishing bit as well. So same deal with the bit, you want to make sure you go from bottom up instead of top down. So you want to take the spot that has no fluting or the shank, push it up through from the bottom, use my ring finger to push it up against the side to make sure this is held as a unit. So it's going to be thumb, middle finger on the collet nut, bit goes up, using my ring finger to push against the side. This prevents the bit from falling back out. Spin the cap or the spindle itself in the clockwise direction to tighten. You want to hand tighten first just to make sure you don't cross thread. Once it's hand tightened, you can now take the wrenches and tighten. There we go. So in this case, I'm now also still trying to take the top wrench or the cap, move it in the clockwise direction. So I'm pulling my wrenches together like that, about 1/8 of a turn. That is now tight. At this point, you can leave the wrenches back over here. Key, this is going to be important later. But you can now put the dust shroud back on and proceed to the next step. So to get to the next step, what you can do is come back over here. All you have to do is close out of the yellow keypad with this X button right here. Once you close out of that, the software will bring you to its next step on its own. What it's going to ask you is basically it wants you to change the bit. I have already done so. So what I can do on this pop-up is just hit OK. This is now asking if I want to move the board or move in the X, Y, and Z direction to go to a Z location. After this pop-up, what's going to happen is it's going to ask you to home the Z axis again. Since we have changed out the bit, the Z has now changed. It's going to ask you to re-zero it. And at this point, the reason why you will want to move it is if the bit is over a spot that is kind of with a pocket. So this is still an okay spot. What I'm going to do is blow off the dust so there's no dust on here. And what's going to come up is again this same familiar screen which says hit enter when above plate and ready to zero. At this point, I am not ready just yet. So make sure you don't hit OK and don't hit enter. what you want to do is pretty much either vacuum or blow this off just so this is a clean surface. I'm going to choose to blow it off. These air guns are typically around in the shop with the air hose. All you have to do is attach it and just do a couple quick bursts just to get any surface dust off. You just want a clean surface just so there's a clean surface for that plate to rest on. If there's any dust underneath the plate, what can happen is it can throw your Z0 off just because there's something underneath it. It will then think that the 0 is higher than it actually is. So again, place this underneath the bit. My bit is pretty much there. You want to take the clip, and the clip goes on the spindle itself right here. And then now you can hit enter. Clicking enter, it will then again bring the bit down twice, once, and twice. So at this point on the screen, if you take a look over there, it's going to remind you again to take the clip and put the plate away. Plate goes there, clip goes there on the plastic, and now you can proceed. I have put that away, so I can now click OK. And again, this is that important screen, once again. This screen with the caution symbol in the upper left-hand corner prompts you to do that 3-step process. Those 3 steps are, again, take the key that is on the wrench, put that in, engage it. Second step is to hit the green start button. Once you hit that, you should hear the spindle spin. If you do not hear a spin, there's either something wrong or you missed one of the steps prior. Spindle spinning, dust collection still on. What I can do now is now hit OK and start. This will start this running, and that will finish out this file. All right, so at this point, the file that we have made is finished. It is right here. It is looking pretty clean. Typically, a good rule of thumb at the end of finishing out your file is going to be to take your actual cut off of the bed, clean everything off, and actually remove the tools from the CNC itself and return it to where you found it. Generally, when you're running a file, it should run more or less the way that you expect it to, based off of the files that you've made. If it doesn't, typically what happens is you've either used the wrong bit, or sometimes the machine itself will have some hiccups. Oftentimes that's going to happen during that 3-step process. When you turn on the key and hit start and then hit OK, if you do that out of order, what's going to happen is the machine will actually think that you have done one of the prior steps and proceed as though the spindle was spinning when it actually is not. That can be very, very dangerous. It's going to then take the bit without spinning it, sort of crash it down into the material and just start dragging it. If the bit's not spinning, what's going to happen is that bit is kind of just acting like a chunk of metal instead of a cutting bit. You have to watch out when that's happening. As always, you just want to make sure that the bit is spinning and you can hear it spin before you actually hit OK. That's going to be where 90% of the mistakes are. Another portion that is oftentimes missed is when you're zeroing at the top of the material. You do have to make sure, like we mentioned before when we were at the computer, where you're touching off at. In that corner, and that little icon is going to tell you whether you're touching off at the top or whether or not you're touching off at the bottom. If you misjudge where that is and you then zero it at the wrong level, what can happen is it can then try to cut through your material in one go instead of actually moving it in the way that it should be. A lot of the troubleshooting is going to happen mostly on the software itself. When you're setting up your files, make sure you know exactly what you're telling the machine to do. When you have that in mind, what can happen is you can then tell what is going wrong if something does go wrong. If there are weird sounds, if something starts to shudder, chatter, if something does not sound right, you can typically tell pretty much instantly. At that point, if something looks dangerous, again, hit the red emergency stops. That will stop all power, and then at that point, you should be finding a technician for help. With the technicians, I would say you should always, if you're not sure of something, check in with someone, whether or not it's a technician or whether it is this video. Just double check your work, and everything should be all right moving forward. And that's just about it. So hope this helped moving forward. Hope your projects work out great, and I'll see you soon next time.